I'm Elizabeth Campbell, 36. And 5 years ago, I sat in stunned silence as my husband of 8 years laughed with his colleagues about our marriage. My wife thinks her little catering business will take off someday, James slurred, champagne glass in hand. Keeps her busy while I pay for everything. The entire table at Le Cirque erupted in laughter, except me. His words crystallized years of subtle dismissals into one brutal moment of clarity. I walked out of that restaurant without a word, leaving my wedding ring in the champagne flute. Today, my company is worth $40 million. James just filed for bankruptcy. Before I dive into this story about how one dinner changed the trajectory of my life forever, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments so I can see how far this family drama has traveled. If you've ever had that moment when someone's true colors finally became clear, hit that like button. And subscribe to join our community of survivors and thrivers who turned painful moments into powerful transformations. Now, let me take you back to how it all began. Growing up in a middle-class home in Connecticut with divorced parents shaped my view of relationships early on. My mother, Catherine, worked 2 jobs to make ends meet after my father left. And I promised myself I'd never be financially dependent on anyone. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through culinary arts school, dreaming of one day owning my own restaurant. The irony of how I eventually betrayed that promise to myself isn't lost on me. I met James Campbell at 26 while catering an event at his investment banking firm. He was 32, confident, and moved through the world with an ease I'd never known. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, I almost thought he was joking. Our worlds couldn't have been more different. Our romance was a whirlwind. Within 8 months, James proposed with a diamond ring that cost more than my annual salary. The wedding made the local society pages, with James's family connections ensuring a guest list full of Manhattan's elite. Looking back, I realize I was more of a prop than a partner at my own wedding. Eleanor, James's mother, handled most of the planning, dismissing my suggestions as quaint or charming but impractical. After the honeymoon, we moved into James's luxury apartment on the Upper East Side. The doorman knew his name, but always hesitated with mine. The transition from my tiny Queens apartment with roommates to this sterile showcase of wealth gave me constant culture shock. I'd find myself apologizing to the cleaning lady who came twice weekly, embarrassed by my sudden elevation in status. Early in our marriage, I put my culinary dreams on hold to support James's career. I hosted dinner parties for his colleagues, planned weekend getaways with his boss's family, and learned the unspoken rules of being an investment banker's wife. When I suggested starting a small catering business from our home kitchen, James seemed supportive on the surface. "That sounds fun, Lizzie. Just make sure it doesn't interfere with the Hendersons' dinner next Friday." Robert could be important for my promotion. The pattern established itself quickly. Whenever I had a catering job lined up, James would suddenly remember an important social obligation requiring my presence. He'd schedule weekend trips on days I had planned to prepare for events. When I complained, he'd remind me who paid the bills. "It's not like you need to work, Elizabeth. Most women would love to be in your position." My friends from culinary school gradually stopped calling. We no longer had anything in common. My new social circle consisted entirely of James's colleagues' wives, who spent their days at yoga classes and charity luncheons. During one particularly memorable shopping trip, one of them patted my arm condescendingly when I mentioned my business. "It's so cute that you're keeping busy," she said. "My therapist says hobbies are essential for mental health." Every Christmas, we visited James's family estate in the Hamptons. During one such visit, 3 years into our marriage, Eleanor cornered me in the kitchen while I was preparing dessert. "Elizabeth, dear," she said, swirling her wine glass, "perhaps it's time to find a hobby that better suits James's position. Have you considered joining the museum board? I could make a call." I smiled politely and continued piping whipped cream onto individual pavlovas. "This isn't a hobby, Eleanor. It's my profession." She laughed as though I'd made a charming joke. "Well, when you're ready to start a family, you'll need to set these little projects aside anyway." I didn't argue. I'd learned that in James's world, keeping up appearances mattered more than authenticity. Later that night, when James asked why I was quiet, I couldn't bring myself to explain how his mother had dismissed my dreams. Instead, I assured him everything was fine. Like I always did. 3 years into our marriage, I barely recognized myself anymore. The passionate, ambitious woman who had worked through nights to perfect her sauces and soufflés had been replaced by someone who spent hours choosing the right outfit for James's work functions. Depression settled over me like a fog that never lifted. I smiled in all the right places and said all the right things. But inside, I was disappearing. James's late nights at the office became more frequent. Sometimes he wouldn't come home until after midnight, smelling of expensive scotch and wearing the faint trace of a perfume I didn't own. One night, while doing laundry, I found a long blonde hair on his collar. When I checked our credit card statements, I discovered charges for jewelry at Tiffany's and dinners at restaurants we had never visited together. When I finally gathered the courage to confront him, James had an explanation ready. The jewelry was for my assistant's 5-year work anniversary, company policy, and those dinners were with clients. The perfume? Elizabeth, don't be ridiculous. I sit in conference rooms with dozens of women every day. His answers made logical sense, but something in his eyes told me he was lying. I suggested marriage counseling, trying to keep my voice steady. James laughed. We don't need some stranger telling us how to fix problems we don't have. You're just bored. Why don't you focus more on your little food thing if you need fulfillment? My little food thing was barely surviving. Time and Taste Catering had a handful of regular clients, mostly friends of friends who hired me for small dinner parties. Whenever I mentioned my business at James's work events, he would quickly change the subject. I later discovered he had actively forgotten to mention my catering services to contacts who were looking for exactly what I offered. For my 30th birthday, I had dropped hints for weeks about a commercial-grade mixer that would help with larger catering jobs. Instead, James presented me with a gym membership. The trainer is supposed to be amazing, he said, oblivious to my disappointment. Melissa Bowman's wife lost 15 pounds with him. The message was clear. Improving my appearance for his colleagues was more important than supporting my business aspirations. Around this time, my college roommate Sophia re-entered my life. We bumped into each other at a farmer's market where I was sourcing ingredients for a small event. Her immediate reaction to seeing me spoke volumes. Elizabeth? Oh my God, you look so different. Are you okay? Over coffee, I found myself breaking down as I tried to explain my life. Sophia listened without judgment, then connected me with Marcus Thompson, a small business consultant who had helped her launch her graphic design studio. Marcus was immediately perplexed by my situation. After reviewing my recipes, techniques, and business approach, he was blunt. You have extraordinary talent that's being wasted. Your pricing is too low. Your branding is non-existent. And you're not leveraging your unique farm-to-table approach. Why are you hiding your light under a bushel? His question hit me like a physical blow. I was hiding, but I wasn't sure who I was hiding from anymore, James or myself. With Marcus's guidance, I began researching small business loans and creating a proper business plan. I set up a separate bank account for business expenses, squirreling away small amounts from our household budget. I built a website using Sophia's design skills, carefully timing my work on it for when James was traveling. James began noticing changes. I was taking more catering jobs, sometimes scheduling them when he had corporate events. I started asking questions about our finances, suggesting we review our investment portfolio together. His response was to check my search history on our shared computer and question my phone calls. Who's Marcus Thompson? Why are you calling him so often? James demanded after checking our phone bill. He's a business consultant helping me with time and taste, I replied. We don't need the money, Elizabeth. Is this really the best use of your time? His tone suggested I was being foolish. I realized then how completely separate our social worlds had become. Everyone in my life was connected to James, his colleagues, their wives, his college friends. The only people who were truly mine were Sophia and now Marcus. The isolation had happened so gradually I hadn't noticed until it was nearly complete. The annual investment firm dinner at Le Cirque was always the social highlight of James's calendar. Partners, senior managers, and their spouses gathered for a night of extravagant food, premium alcohol, and the kind of networking that advanced careers. In previous years, I'd approached these events with dread disguised as enthusiasm. This year was different. I spent days preparing not just my appearance, but my conversation topics. I researched the firm's recent deals, memorized the names of partners' spouses, and practiced anecdotes about my catering business that were brief but impressive. James had been unusually attentive in the days leading up to the dinner, complimenting my outfits and asking about my day. I allowed myself to hope that perhaps he was finally seeing me again. When we arrived at Le Cirque, the maitre d' greeted James by name. I wore a black dress that had cost more than my first car, with my hair and makeup professionally done. James kept his hand on the small of my back, guiding me through the crowd of financial elites with practiced ease. For a brief moment, I felt like we were a team again. That illusion shattered when I saw the seating chart. James was positioned at table 1 with senior partners, while I was relegated to table 4 with the wives. A familiar disappointment settled in my stomach as James squeezed my hand. Network with the ladies. Lizzie, Margaret's husband, just made partner. Find out how she supported him. At table 4, the conversation revolved around vacation homes, children's private schools, and the latest cosmetic procedures. I picked at my truffle risotto while listening to women discuss their allowances from their husbands. Donald gives me $5,000 a month for personal expenses, one woman boasted. Of course, that doesn't include household costs or my facials, which are considered maintenance. The others nodded appreciatively, while I wondered when adult women having an allowance had become something to aspire to rather than a sign of infantilization. As dinner progressed, the drinking intensified. I watched James from across the room, the center of attention as always. His table erupted in laughter repeatedly, the noise growing louder as bottles emptied. I was on my second sparkling water, keeping my wits about me. During dessert, I excused myself to use the restroom. Taking a slightly indirect route back to my table, I passed close to James's group just as the conversation shifted. Campbell, how does your wife feel about your 60-hour weeks? One of the partners asked. James's response, intended for his colleagues but clearly audible to me standing just behind him, changed everything. My wife thinks her little catering business will take off someday, he slurred, champagne glass gesturing sloppily. Keeps her busy while I pay for everything. The table erupted in laughter. My presence went unnoticed as James continued. She doesn't understand finance, but she looks good at parties. That's the division of labor in our household. More laughter. James was glowing with their approval. Last month she catered some tech startup thing and thought she'd made it big. I didn't have the heart to tell her it was my client who hired her as a favor to me. They threw most of the food out afterward. I froze, the truth hitting me like a physical blow. The Skyward Bound event, my biggest success to date, had been charity orchestrated by my husband. Every congratulation I'd received had been tainted by pity. In that moment, 8 years of small humiliations crystallized into perfect clarity. I wasn't James's partner. I was his possession, a decorative object he occasionally showed off and frequently mocked. The fog that had surrounded me for years suddenly lifted, leaving razor-sharp clarity in its place. With steady hands that surprised even me, I removed my wedding ring. I caught the eye of a waiter, borrowed his serving tray for a moment, and placed my champagne flute on it. I dropped the platinum band into the bubbling liquid, where it sank to the bottom with a satisfying clink. No one noticed as I walked to the coat check, retrieved my wrap, and stepped out into the cool Manhattan night. In the taxi ride home, I made a detailed mental inventory of what in our shared life was truly mine. The answer was depressingly little. At our apartment, I packed only what I had brought into the marriage. Clothes, a few pieces of jewelry from my mother, my professional knives, and personal mementos. It all fit into 2 suitcases. On the counter, I left a note with 7 words. You won't need to support my little business anymore. I checked into a modest hotel 20 blocks away, my catering equipment and ingredients stacked neatly in the corner of the room. For the first time in years, I felt terror and exhilaration in equal measure. I had no idea what would come next, but I knew with absolute certainty that I could never go back. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, planning my future with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. By dawn, I had the outline of a new life sketched out in the hotel notepad, a life that would be entirely my own. I've often thought about what was happening at the dinner as I left. Did James look for me? Did anyone notice the ring in the champagne? Or did the party continue uninterrupted, my absence as unremarkable as my presence had always been? I'll never know for sure, but sometimes I wonder if my leaving that night was the first time James truly saw me. Have you ever had that moment when you suddenly saw your relationship from the outside and realized it wasn't what you thought? That clarity can be painful but also freeing. If you're finding this story resonating with your own experiences, please hit like so I know I'm not alone in this journey. Now, let me tell you what happened after I walked away from everything I thought I wanted. My phone began ringing at 2 a.m. James, presumably home from dinner and discovering my absence, called 17 times in succession. I silenced the ringer and listened to his voicemails the next morning, tracking his emotional journey from confusion to anger to bargaining. Elizabeth, where are you? Call me back. This isn't funny, Elizabeth. Come home now. Whatever I did, I'm sorry. Just come home and we can talk about it. You're being ridiculous. You have nowhere to go. Think about what you're doing. If you don't come home by tomorrow, I'll cancel all the credit cards. The final message, left at 4:38 a.m., was slurred and threatening. You'll regret this, Elizabeth. You have nothing without me. Nothing. I checked out of the hotel after 2 nights and accepted Sophia's offer to stay in her spare bedroom. James had indeed frozen our joint accounts, leaving me with only the cash I had withdrawn and squirreled away. It was enough for a few weeks, nothing more. Sophia connected me with her lawyer friend, Jennifer Winters, who specialized in high-conflict divorces. Jennifer's hourly rate was intimidating, but she agreed to an initial consultation at no charge as a favor to Sophia. Your husband has money and connections, Jennifer warned after hearing my story. This won't be easy, but leaving your wedding ring in that champagne glass? That's the kind of detail that could work in our favor. Judges are human too. James demanded a meeting 1 week after I left. We met in Jennifer's office, a neutral territory where I felt somewhat protected. James alternated between charm and intimidation, clearly unused to not getting his way. Lizzie, this is absurd, he said, flashing the smile that had once made my heart race. Whatever you think you heard at that dinner, I was drunk. You know how these work events get. Come home, and we can forget this nonsense. When I remained silent, his demeanor changed. Do you really think you can make it on your own? Your catering business barely covers its costs. You have no savings, no real assets. Be reasonable. Jennifer intervened. Mr. Campbell, threatening my client isn't productive. Elizabeth is entitled to an equitable division of marital assets. If you're not prepared to discuss that today, we can continue this conversation through formal legal channels. The meeting ended with James storming out, but not before making one last appeal. I made you, Elizabeth. No one knew who you were before me. His words rang in my ears for days afterward, partly because I feared they might be true. The divorce proceedings revealed James had been manipulating our finances in ways I hadn't imagined. Investment accounts I thought we shared were in his name only. He had been recording large loans to his parents that mysteriously never appeared in our joint tax filings. Jennifer was relentless, hiring a forensic accountant who unraveled years of financial misdirection. I made a strategic decision that shocked both James and Jennifer. I didn't want the apartment, the vacation property, or any of the luxury items. I wanted only my fair financial share and a clean break. The longer this drags on, the longer I'm still tied to him, I explained to Jennifer. I need to move forward, not fight over crystal vases I never liked anyway. My mother, Catherine, had been wary of James from the beginning. When I finally told her everything, she wasn't surprised. He reminded me too much of your father, she admitted. All charm on the surface and selfishness underneath. Catherine offered me her small inheritance from my grandmother, $30,000 she'd been saving for retirement. I initially refused, but she insisted. I'd rather see you use it to build something than have you trapped like I was, she said. Just promise you'll pay me back when you can. I found a tiny apartment with a commercial-grade kitchen that had belonged to a retired pastry chef. The rent consumed nearly half my monthly budget, but having a proper workspace felt non-negotiable. Marcus helped me develop a legitimate business plan for time and taste catering, focusing on corporate lunches rather than private dinners to generate more consistent revenue. My first independent catering job was a disaster. I underestimated the prep time for a 50-person lunch, ran out of a key ingredient, and had to substitute at the last minute. The substitution contained an allergen that wasn't properly labeled. One guest had a mild allergic reaction, nothing serious, but enough to generate complaints. I spent the night after that event sitting on my kitchen floor, surrounded by unpaid invoices and failed recipes, seriously considering calling James to negotiate a return. In my darkest moment, I actually picked up the phone. Sophia found me in that state and called Ryan Chen, a PR specialist friend who had handled similar crises for restaurant clients. Ryan helped craft an apology to the client, implement proper allergen protocols, and turn the incident into a lesson rather than a business ender. Every successful entrepreneur has a failure story, Ryan assured me. This is yours. Now make sure you never need another one. I used part of my mother's money to take culinary refresher courses, focusing on commercial kitchen management rather than just cooking techniques. I learned about food safety regulations, proper staffing ratios, and the business side of catering that I had neglected while cooking in James's shadow. The divorce was finalized 8 months after I left Le Cirque. The settlement was less than I deserved, but enough to give me runway for my business. As we left the courthouse, James couldn't resist one final prediction. You'll come crawling back within a year, Elizabeth. Reality has a way of crushing dreams. The stress of those months manifested in physical ways, panic attacks that woke me gasping for air, weight loss that left my clothes hanging loosely, insomnia that no amount of chamomile tea could touch. But I also found unexpected support. A group of women in similar situations became my informal therapy group. We met weekly at a coffee shop to share resources, lawyer recommendations, and simply validate each other's experiences. One woman, Rebecca, who had rebuilt her life after leaving a controlling husband 5 years earlier, became a particular source of strength. The first year is survival mode, she told me over coffee. The second year, you remember who you were before him. The third year, you discover who you want to become. I clung to her timeline like a lifeline, counting the days until I might feel whole again. As I finish telling this part of my story, I realize how many of you might be at this very crossroads right now, having left something harmful but unsure if you have what it takes to rebuild. The mountain ahead seems insurmountable. If that's you, know that the hardest step was the one you've already taken by walking away. The rest is just putting one foot in front of the other. Drop a comment if you've had to start over, and how you found the strength. I'll continue my story after this brief pause, and show you exactly how I built something from nothing but determination. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, I barely recognized my life. I was working 18-hour days, sleeping on a pull-out couch in my tiny apartment to save on rent, and pouring every dollar back into time and taste catering. With Marcus's help, I secured a small business loan, leveraging the divorce settlement as collateral. Every penny was accounted for, there was no room for error. I developed a farm-to-table concept for corporate catering, partnering with local farmers to source ingredients sustainably. The approach was novel in the corporate catering space, where convenience typically trumped quality. My pitch was simple. Employees who ate well worked better, and companies investing in quality meals were investing in productivity. My lucky break came from desperation. A high-profile tech startup, Skyward Bound, had been left without catering for an investor event when their regular service canceled last minute. A former culinary school classmate who worked there remembered my business and called at 9 p.m. the night before, frantic. "We need lunch for 35 people by noon tomorrow. Can you handle it?" I spent the entire night cooking, borrowed Sophia's car to transport everything, and arrived at Skyward Bound's office with minutes to spare. The menu was simple but executed perfectly. Seasonal vegetable tartines, herb-crusted chicken with chimichurri, ancient grain salads, and individual lemon tarts for dessert. Everything was labeled with the farm it came from and any potential allergens. Skyward Bound's founder, Abigail Reynolds, sought me out during the event. "This is extraordinary," she said, holding up a half-eaten tartine. "Most corporate catering is indistinguishable from airline food. How have I not heard of you before?" We talked for 20 minutes about my business philosophy. By the end of the conversation, she had contracted me for all company events and made introductions to 3 other tech CEOs in her network. With consistent work coming in, I hired my first 2 employees, Mia and Jackson, recent culinary school graduates willing to work for experience as much as salary. We outgrew my apartment kitchen within weeks and leased a small commercial space in an unfashionable part of Brooklyn. I developed signature dishes that became brand hallmarks: seasonal vegetable tarts with edible flowers, herb-infused olive oils packaged in small bottles for clients to take home, and miniature desserts that delivered flavor without excess. We created eco-friendly packaging from compostable materials, with seed paper labels that could be planted to grow herbs. 6 months into this new phase, a local business magazine featured Time and Taste in a small profile about sustainable food businesses. The article was minor, but it led to several new client inquiries. One evening, while delivering an order to a financial firm, I ran into Peter Holloway, one of James's colleagues. "Elizabeth," he said, surprise evident in his voice, "I heard you were doing something with food. This is all yours?" "All mine," I confirmed, handing him my business card. Time and Taste Catering. We specialize in sustainable corporate dining experiences. He looked at the card, then at me, clearly reassessing. "You're doing well then?" "I'm building something I believe in," I replied. "That's worth more than doing well." The encounter was brief, but word traveled fast in James's circles. Within days, I received a call from a company where James was trying to secure new business. They wanted to discuss regular catering services for their executive team lunches. I later learned that James had attempted to sabotage my growing reputation by suggesting to mutual acquaintances that my kitchen might not meet health code standards. I responded by inviting health inspectors to conduct a thorough inspection, which we passed with flying colors. I posted the certification prominently on our website and social media. Cash flow remained a constant challenge. Twice, I nearly missed payroll, staying up all night calling clients to gently request early payment on invoices. I developed a bartering system with local farmers, offering catering for their family events in exchange for prime ingredients. My first-year tax returns showed a modest but genuine profit of $22,000. I framed the document and hung it in our kitchen prep area as motivation. After considerable thought, I made the decision to rebrand from Time and Taste Catering to Campbell's Harvest, reclaiming my married name for my own purposes. "Are you sure you want to keep his name?" Sophia asked when I shared the decision. "It's my name now," I replied. "He doesn't get to take anything else from me." The daily struggle taught me skills James had never developed. When our delivery van broke down, I learned basic mechanics to avoid expensive repair bills. When a client complained about pricing, I personally walked them through our sourcing costs rather than simply discounting. When ingredients didn't arrive, I improvised menus on the spot. Each crisis built resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Each solution proved I could survive without James's money or connections. Each small victory was sweeter for being entirely mine. I rarely thought about James during those exhausting days, too busy solving immediate problems to dwell on the past. But occasionally, usually late at night while finalizing next day's prep lists, I would wonder what he would make of the woman I was becoming so different from the carefully curated wife I had been. I hoped news of my small successes irritated him. It wasn't a noble thought, but it was an honest one. The most significant lesson from this period wasn't about business strategy or culinary techniques. It was simpler and more profound. I discovered that failing on my own terms felt infinitely better than succeeding on someone else's. Every mistake was mine to make and mine to fix. Every triumph, no matter how small, belonged completely to me. One night, after a particularly successful event where everything had gone perfectly, Marcus, Mia, Jackson, and I sat on overturned prep buckets in our kitchen, sharing the leftover chocolate torte and cheap champagne. To Campbell's Harvest, Marcus toasted, and to Elizabeth, who walked away from comfort to build something real. As we clinked plastic cups, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pride. Not the reflected glow of being James Campbell's wife, but genuine pride in my own creation. The business was still fragile, still fighting for every client, but it was authentically mine. That moment of celebration, humble as it was, marked a turning point. I was no longer running from my past. I was building a future. I was no longer James Campbell's discarded wife. I was Elizabeth Campbell, founder and chef. The distinction made all the difference. 2 years after walking out of Le Cirque, Campbell's Harvest had achieved stability. We had 8 full-time employees, a renovated commercial kitchen, and a loyal client base of 20 corporate customers who ordered regularly. We weren't wealthy, but we paid our bills on time, and I had finally repaid my mother's loan with interest. I was catering a tech conference when fate intervened in the form of Gordon Hayes, a celebrity chef known for his farm-to-table restaurants and television presence. Gordon was the keynote speaker, discussing sustainable food systems. During the networking lunch, I noticed him sampling our signature heirloom tomato tarts. I watched nervously as he took a bite, then another, then sought out a server to ask a question. Minutes later, I found myself face to face with the chef whose cookbooks had inspired me in culinary school. "Who made these tomato tarts?" he asked without preamble. "I did," I replied, extending my hand. "Elizabeth Campbell, Campbell's Harvest Catering. The tomato-to-pastry ratio is perfect. And you've managed to keep the crust crisp despite the moisture in the filling. That's rare in catering settings." His assessment was professional, not flattering. "Do you have a card?" 3 days later, Gordon's business manager called to arrange a meeting. Gordon had been developing a line of ready-made gourmet meals for retail, but was struggling with quality control in the mass production process. He had been impressed by our food's integrity, even in a large-scale catering context. "I'm looking for a collaborator, not just a manufacturer," Gordon explained during our first meeting. "Someone who understands that scaling up shouldn't mean compromising standards." The opportunity was both exhilarating and terrifying. Gordon was proposing we develop a line of ready-made meals together, leveraging his name recognition and my production capabilities. The potential was enormous, but so was the risk. For weeks, we worked on recipe development, testing dozens of variations to find dishes that could be mass-produced without sacrificing quality. My tiny apartment became a test kitchen, with every surface covered in sample containers and tasting notes. I slept only a few hours each night, caught between regular catering operations during the day and product development with Gordon in the evenings. The breakthrough came with our preservation method. Rather than using artificial preservatives, we developed a modified sous vide technique that extended shelf life naturally. The process was more expensive but allowed us to maintain our commitment to clean ingredients. Gordon's connections secured us a meeting with Whole Foods. I spent 3 days preparing for the pitch, rehearsing numbers and processes until I could recite them in my sleep. The day of the presentation, I wore the only business suit I owned, purchased secondhand and tailored to fit. The Whole Foods executives were impressed by our samples but concerned about production capacity. "These taste amazing," the purchasing director acknowledged. "But can you actually produce at the volume we would require?" I presented our scaling plan with more confidence than I felt. "We've secured a manufacturing partner with experience in small batch production. We can meet initial demand in 3 key markets, with expansion capability within 6 months." What I didn't mention was that the manufacturing partner was a commercial kitchen we hadn't yet leased, and the experience in small batch production referred to my team, who had never produced for retail before. Against all odds, they said yes. Whole Foods agreed to carry our product line in 23 Northeast stores as a test market. We had 90 days to deliver. Those 90 days nearly broke me. I took night classes in business administration while spending days retrofitting our new production space. I hired food scientists and nutritionists to perfect our preservation methods and ensure consistent quality. I used the remainder of my divorce settlement to invest in equipment, reasoning that if this failed, I could at least sell the assets to recoup some losses. Marcus worked alongside me, learning food production regulations while developing packaging with Sophia. Gordon provided his expertise and name recognition, but made it clear the operational execution fell to me. Every sample batch had to receive his approval, resulting in countless revisions and refinements. The first time I saw our products on grocery store shelves, Harvest and Hayes premium meals featuring both our names, I cried in the freezer section, earning concerned looks from other shoppers. The packaging was beautiful, with clear windows showing the actual food rather than stylized photos. Each container told the story of the ingredients' origins and our commitment to sustainable farming practices. Sales exceeded projections by 200% in the first quarter. The combination of Gordon's name recognition and our genuinely superior product created immediate demand. Whole Foods expanded our distribution to 75 stores by month 3, and we struggled to keep up with production. As our company grew, so did media interest. Forbes 30 Under 40 food entrepreneurs featured me in a small profile, highlighting our rapid growth and innovative approach. The article mentioned my previous marriage to James only in passing, focusing instead on Campbell's Harvest's successful transformation from catering company to retail brand. We expanded from meal kits to gourmet frozen options, developing a proprietary freezing method that preserved texture better than conventional processes. Our product line grew to 15 offerings, including seasonal specialties that rotated quarterly. Within months, our staff expanded to 50 employees across development, production, and administration. I promoted Mia to head of recipe development and hired experienced professionals to manage areas beyond my expertise. Gordon and I had negotiated a 5-year partnership agreement, but after the initial success, I approached him about buying out his stake. He was surprised but not opposed. "Why buy me out when the partnership is working so well?" he asked. "Because I need to build this my way," I replied honestly. "You've been invaluable in getting us here. But for the next phase, I need complete control." The negotiation was amicable, resulting in Gordon maintaining a promotional relationship while I secured full operational ownership. The buyout stretched our finances to the breaking point, but independence was worth the risk. The day I was able to give my mother Catherine a check that repaid her inheritance plus interest was one of the proudest of my life. She tried to refuse the interest, but I insisted. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself," I told her. "That kind of faith deserves returns." With the business stabilizing, I purchased a modest brownstone in Brooklyn, nothing like James's luxury apartment, but entirely mine. The closing day, I brought a bottle of champagne and sat alone on the floor of the empty house, toasting my independence. Sophia eventually joined Campbell's Harvest as Chief Operating Officer, bringing her organizational skills to our rapidly growing enterprise. Marcus left his consulting job to become my business partner and CFO. The three of us who had started with nothing now oversaw a company that was changing the prepared foods industry. Word of our success inevitably reached James. He reached out through mutual friends, suggesting we discuss investment opportunities. I declined through the same channels, taking a certain satisfaction in the formal rejection. The business hit its first $1 million month 2.5 years after I walked out of Le Cirque. We celebrated with a small gathering at my brownstone, just the core team who had been there from the beginning. No photographers, no press, just people who had taken a chance on a woman starting over. As I looked around at my team laughing and sharing stories of our earliest disasters, I realized that success itself wasn't enough to fill a life. The money and recognition were validating, particularly knowing that James was aware of my achievement. But the true reward was the community I'd built, people who valued me for my abilities rather than as an accessory to someone else's life. That night, after everyone left, I sat on my back patio with a glass of wine, reflecting on how completely my life had transformed. The revenge fantasy of proving James wrong had sustained me through the hardest times, but I was beginning to outgrow it. My success hadn't just been about showing him what he had lost. It had become about discovering what I could create. 3 years after our divorce, Campbell's Harvest had become a household name in the Northeast. Our products were in over 2,000 stores, and we had just signed a distribution deal expanding to the West Coast. I had a team of 85 employees, an executive assistant, and the kind of schedule that required careful management by multiple people. When the invitation arrived to speak at the National Women's Business Conference, I accepted immediately. The email mentioned that the conference focused on authentic leadership and resilience topics I felt uniquely qualified to address. It wasn't until I received the full speaker list that I noticed James Campbell would be attending. representing his investment firm on a panel about venture capital. My immediate instinct was to withdraw. The thought of seeing James again, of potentially being in the same room with him, made my stomach clench with anxiety. I called Sophia in a panic. "I can't do this," I said. "I'll look like I'm deliberately trying to rub my success in his face." "Or," Sophia countered, "you'll look like exactly what you are, a successful business leader who belongs at that conference. His presence is irrelevant." I knew she was right. But the prospect of facing James was daunting. In 3 years, I had built a new life, a new identity, and a new confidence. But I hadn't tested any of it against the person who had once defined my worth. I prepared meticulously for the conference, working with a speech coach to refine my keynote. The topic, authentic leadership, building business on your own terms, felt uncomfortably personal. I would essentially be telling the story of leaving James, though I planned to keep him anonymous in my remarks. The morning of my speech, I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit that projected confidence without ostentation. My team had prepared slides showcasing Campbell's Harvest's growth trajectory and impact statistics. On paper, I was more than ready. Emotionally, I felt like I might shatter. To my relief, James wasn't present for my keynote. I delivered my speech to a packed room, sharing vulnerable truths about rebuilding after personal and professional devastation. The standing ovation took me by surprise, as did the line of women waiting to speak with me afterward. Many shared their own stories of starting over after relationships or careers that had diminished them. I was still speaking with attendees when I felt a shift in the energy of the room. Looking up, I saw James standing at the edge of the group, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Our eyes met briefly before I returned my attention to the woman currently speaking to me. By the time I finished the last conversation, James had moved closer, hovering just beyond the stage. He looked both the same and different, the same confident posture and expensive suit, but with new lines around his eyes and a slightly less assured expression. "Elizabeth," he said as I approached. "That was quite a speech." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I didn't know you were in the audience." "I caught most of it." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've done well for yourself. I always knew you had potential." The old Elizabeth might have accepted this backhanded compliment, might have been pathetically grateful for his acknowledgement. The new Elizabeth simply raised an eyebrow. "No, James. You really didn't." His smile faltered. We stood in uncomfortable silence until he gestured toward the exit. "Can I buy you a coffee, for old time's sake?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. In the hotel cafe, James ordered an espresso while I chose tea. The contrast wasn't lost on me. He still needed the strongest option available, while I had learned to appreciate subtlety. So, he began after an awkward silence. "Campbell's Harvest. Very clever, keeping my name." "It's my name too," I replied. "And I earned it." James's carefully constructed charm began to slip as he described his recent career challenges. His firm had been reluctant to promote him after losing several key clients. He had been passed over for partner twice. The real estate market had affected some investments. Nothing was explicitly his fault in the telling. What he didn't say, but what became clear as he spoke, was that he wanted something from me: connections, introductions, perhaps even investment. The realization was so absurd, I almost laughed. The man who had mocked my little catering business now wanted to leverage my success. "James?" I interrupted his subtle pitch. "Why are we having coffee?" He looked genuinely confused. "I thought we could catch up. Perhaps discuss potential synergies between our professional worlds." "Synergies," I repeated. "You mean you want access to my business network?" His expression confirmed my suspicion before he could formulate a denial. I stood, gathering my conference materials. "I wish you well, James. Truly. But our professional worlds don't need to intersect." As I turned to leave, I noticed a young woman watching our table intently from across the cafe. Something in her anxious expression was hauntingly familiar. James followed my gaze and waved the woman over with obvious reluctance. "Elizabeth, this is my fiancée, Veronica." "Veronica." "Elizabeth." Veronica looked to be in her late 20s, with the same careful styling and nervous deference I recognized from my own past. She shook my hand with a grip that tried too hard to be firm. "James has told me so much about you," she said, the practiced line falling flat as her eyes darted to him for approval. "I doubt that very much," I replied gently. When James excused himself to take a call, I made a split-second decision I might have later regretted. "Veronica, I don't know your situation, and I'm not going to presume. But if you ever need help of any kind, or just want to talk, here's my card. My personal cell is on the back." She glanced nervously toward where James stood talking on his phone, then quickly pocketed the card. "He said you'd be bitter and try to turn me against him." "I'm sure he did." I nodded. "Just keep the card. You don't have to use it." James returned moments later, clearly irritated to find us in conversation. As they walked away, his hand on the small of Veronica's back just a little too controlling, I felt an unexpected weight of responsibility. I couldn't save her, she would have to make her own decisions just as I had, but I could offer a lifeline if she ever needed one. As I prepared to leave the conference the following morning, I encountered Eleanor Campbell in the hotel lobby. James's mother looked older but still impeccably dressed, her posture rigid as she deliberately approached me. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice lacking its former condescension. "You look well." "Thank you, Eleanor." "So do you." She glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard. "I saw your speech yesterday. You've built something remarkable." Coming from Eleanor, this qualified as effusive praise. I thanked her again, unsure where the conversation was heading. "James doesn't know I'm attending this conference," she continued, her voice lower. "I came to hear a friend speak and saw your name on the program." She opened her handbag and withdrew a business card, pressing it into my palm. On the back, she had written a single line, "Help her if you can." "Veronica reminds me of you when you first married James," Eleanor said quietly. "I didn't help you then. I regret that now." Before I could respond, she walked away, leaving me holding the card and a new understanding that the patterns in James's life extended far beyond our marriage. On the flight home, I began formulating an idea that would eventually become the Campbell Foundation, providing business grants and mentorship to women rebuilding after financial control relationships. The conference confrontation with James provided an unexpected closure. I had faced my past and found it smaller than my present, less significant than my future. The woman who had been so devastated by his mockery at Les Cirques no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who could look James Campbell in the eye and feel not anger, but a kind of distant pity. 4 years after leaving James, Campbell's Harvest had transformed from a scrappy startup into a legitimate empire. Our product line was in over 2,000 stores nationwide. I had published a cookbook, Fresh Starts, Recipes for Renewal, which spent 8 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. I had become a regular guest on morning shows and cooking channels, demonstrating recipes and sharing my philosophy of sustainable food systems. The most exciting development was opening my first restaurant, Time, in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood. The location was deliberate far enough from Les Cirques to avoid painful associations, but squarely in the heart of the city that had witnessed both my downfall and resurrection. The critical response exceeded my wildest expectations, with the New York Times giving us 3 stars and particularly praising our commitment to waste reduction and farmer partnerships. As the business scaled, I made the difficult decision to hire a CEO to manage daily operations while I focused on vision and creative direction. Caroline Winters, a veteran of the food industry who had approached the business challenges of organics before they became trendy, stepped into the role with confidence and competence. "Your job is to be the heart and soul of this company," she told me during our transition. "My job is to ensure the body functions efficiently." With more breathing room in my schedule, I launched the mentorship program I had been planning since the conference encounter with Veronica. The Campbell Foundation provided business grants to women rebuilding after financial control relationships, with particular emphasis on entrepreneurship training and financial literacy. As my professional star rose, James's appeared to be falling. Through mutual acquaintances and occasional industry gossip, I learned that his firm had placed him on probation after losing several major accounts. His investment strategies had become increasingly risky, with diminishing returns that concerned the partners. I hadn't seen James since the conference until a business dinner at the Pierre, where Campbell's Harvest was catering for a potential European distribution partner. I was discussing ingredient sourcing with the head buyer when James appeared at my elbow, glass in hand and smile too wide. Elizabeth! What a wonderful surprise! I was just telling Wilhelm here about our connection. Wilhelm, the German distribution executive I'd been cultivating for months, looked between us with interest. Mr. Campbell was explaining that you were previously acquainted, he said, his English precise. We were married, James clarified, placing a proprietary hand on my shoulder that I immediately shrugged off. Elizabeth got her start in my world before branching out on her own. The revisionist history was so breathtaking I almost admired his audacity. Almost. Actually, I corrected gently. I got my start despite James's world. Not because of it. But that's ancient history. I turned to Wilhelm. Shall we continue our discussion about the Alpine region distribution? James lingered awkwardly, eventually drifting away when it became clear I wouldn't play along with his networking strategy. Later that evening, I overheard him trying to leverage our close personal relationship to secure a meeting with another of my business associates. The attempt was as transparent as it was unsuccessful. 2 weeks after that encounter, I received an acquisition offer from Magnacorp, a major food conglomerate. The number $40 million was substantial enough to warrant serious consideration. I assembled my executive team, along with Sophia, Marcus, and my most trusted advisors, to evaluate the proposal. The debate was intense. Selling would provide financial security beyond anything I had imagined possible. Remaining independent meant continuing to control our mission and methods but facing increasing competition from larger players. During our final decision meeting, my assistant interrupted with an urgent message. James had called the office 3 times, insisting he needed to speak with me about a time-sensitive business opportunity. Tell him I'm in meetings all day, I instructed. If it's genuinely urgent, he can email the details. An email arrived within minutes, containing a business proposal so audacious it momentarily left me speechless. James was suggesting a strategic partnership between Campbell's Harvest and a new investment fund he was launching, focused on sustainable businesses. He needed a flagship client to attract other investors. Reading between the lines, it was clear he was desperate for the association with my successful brand. The proposal included financial projections that seemed wildly optimistic and a structure that would give James significant influence over Campbell's Harvest's direction. Most telling was his closing paragraph. This opportunity would allow us to combine our strengths once again, with your culinary vision complemented by my financial expertise. It would be like coming full circle from where we began. Sophia, reading over my shoulder, let out a low whistle. Wow. Just wow. Marcus was more direct. This reads like a drowning man grabbing for a life preserver. I forwarded the email to Jennifer, my lawyer, with a single question. Is he in financial trouble? Jennifer's network extended into Manhattan's financial community. Her response came that evening. Sources say he's been borrowing heavily to maintain appearances. Rumor has it he made some significant personal guarantees on investments that haven't panned out. The following week, the New York Post's Page 6 reported that James had moved out of our former Upper East Side apartment into a significantly more modest condo in Murray Hill. The gossip column noted that his Mercedes had been repossessed from the investment firm's parking garage, a public humiliation in his status-conscious world. After much consideration, I declined the Magnacorp offer, choosing instead to maintain independence and control of Campbell's Harvest. We celebrated the decision with a company-wide announcement, emphasizing our commitment to our founding values of sustainability and quality. That same day, I received notification that James had been terminated from his firm after a disastrous investment recommendation cost a significant client millions. The coincidental timing gave me no satisfaction. Instead, I felt an unexpected empathy for the man who had once seemed so powerful to me. His identity had been as wrapped up in his financial success as mine had once been in being his wife. Both identities had proven dangerously fragile. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived from James's lawyer. The carefully worded request asked if I would consider extending a personal loan to James to bridge his current temporary cash flow situation. The letter emphasized our previously close relationship, and suggested a mutually beneficial arrangement. After consulting with Jennifer, I declined the loan request. Instead, I sent James information about the Campbell Foundation's financial literacy program with a personal note. This helped other people rebuild. It might help you too. 2 months later, James filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection. The public filing revealed debts exceeding $3 million, including luxury credit cards, personal loans, and tax liabilities. The man who had once mocked my catering business as a hobby was now financially ruined. When I heard the news, I expected to feel vindicated. The fantasy of James witnessing my success while experiencing his own failure had sustained me through many difficult early days. But the reality brought no satisfaction. His downfall didn't enhance my achievement. If anything, it cast a shadow over it, linking us in a narrative of revenge rather than renewal. That night, I called Veronica, who had reached out several months after the conference. She had left James shortly after his probation began, when his controlling behavior had escalated alongside his professional frustration. She was now working at a marketing firm and taking night classes in graphic design. "Did you hear about James?" she asked immediately. "Yes." "How do you feel about it?" She paused before answering. "Relieved that I got out when I did. Sad for who he could have been. Mostly just nothing." Her response resonated with my own complex feelings. James's significance in our lives had diminished to nearly nothing. His power over us had been relinquished long before his financial collapse. "Nothing is a perfectly reasonable response," I assured her. "You don't owe him any emotion at all." After our call, I sat on my rooftop garden, a luxury my younger self could never have imagined, looking out over Brooklyn toward the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere in that skyline, James was confronting a new reality where his name, connections, and charm no longer guaranteed success. It was a reality I had faced 4 years earlier, standing in a hotel room with 2 suitcases and no plan beyond survival. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, but neither was the fundamental difference. I had rebuilt from nothing, while James was struggling to adjust to losing everything. My empire had grown from genuine passion and determination. His had been built on appearances and expectations. In the end, substance had outlasted style. As I watched the city lights flicker against the darkening sky, I realized that my success had never truly been about proving James wrong. It had been about proving myself right. 5 years to the day after walking out of Le Cirque, I stood in the kitchen of Campbell's Harvest's newest venture, a sustainable farming operation on 50 acres outside the city. The land had once belonged to the Winfield family, whose heirloom tomatoes had been the first ingredients I'd sourced when rebuilding my catering business. When Mr. Winfield decided to retire, he approached me about purchasing the farm rather than selling to developers. "You understand what this land means," he told me, gesturing to rows of greenhouses and carefully tended fields. "You'll keep it alive." The acquisition represented more than business expansion. It was an investment in the entire ecosystem that had supported my rebirth from the soil that grew our ingredients to the community that had embraced my vision. We launched agricultural education programs for underprivileged youth, teaching sustainable farming techniques and food entrepreneurship. My public profile had grown alongside the business. The cover of Entrepreneur magazine featured me standing in the farm's central field, highlighting our vertically integrated approach to food production. My TED Talk on authentic success and sustainable business practices went viral, bringing Campbell's Harvest philosophy to a global audience. Personal milestones marked this period as well. Sophia and Marcus, whose friendship had sustained me through the darkest times, announced their engagement with a request that surprised me. They wanted to hold their wedding at the farm. "This place represents everything we believe in," Sophia explained. "Growth, resilience, new beginnings." The celebration brought together everyone who had contributed to Campbell's Harvest journey, from my mother, Catherine, who now lived in the guest house on my Brooklyn property, to the first employees who had taken a chance on a fledgling catering company. The foundation team was there as well, along with several women who had successfully launched businesses after completing our program. Veronica attended with her new partner, a kind-eyed photographer who looked at her with genuine respect. She had completed her graphic design certificate and established a small but growing branding agency, with the Campbell Foundation providing her first business loan. My world had expanded in ways I could never have imagined that night in the hotel room with 2 suitcases. Yet something remained unresolved, a loose thread in the tapestry of my new life that occasionally caught and pulled when I least expected it. That resolution came unexpectedly on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was leaving a meeting with our restaurant suppliers when I literally bumped into James on Madison Avenue. He looked older, tired in a way that went beyond physical appearance. The expensive suit remained, but it hung slightly loose, as though tailored for the man he had been rather than the one he had become. "Elizabeth," he said, genuine surprise in his voice. "You look well." "Thank you, James." The awkwardness stretched between us until I added, "How are you?" He hesitated, clearly considering and discarding several possible responses before settling on the truth. Starting over. "It's harder than I expected." The simple admission, so at odds with the James I had known, caught me off guard. I found myself suggesting coffee, curious about this unfamiliar version of my ex-husband. At a small cafe 3 blocks away, James explained that he was moving to Chicago the following week to join his cousin's financial advisory firm. "A junior position," he clarified. "Back to the beginning." "Sometimes the beginning is the best place to start," I offered. "It was for me." He stirred his coffee unnecessarily. "I owe you an apology, Elizabeth, a real one, not the manipulative nonsense I've attempted before." I waited, unsure if this was another performance. "I was cruel to you," he continued. "I undermined you, belittled your ambitions, and treated you as an accessory rather than a partner. And then I had the audacity to be surprised when you left." The apology was so unexpected, so contrary to the James I had known, that I struggled to formulate a response. What I said at Le Cirque that night. He shook his head. "I've replayed it 1,000 times. You deserved better." "Yes," I agreed quietly, "I did. For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've built." "Not in a taking credit way," he added hastily. "Just impressed. You were always capable of extraordinary things." I was too insecure to support that. We talked for nearly an hour. James spoke about therapy, about recognizing patterns from his father's behavior in his own. He asked thoughtful questions about Campbell's harvest and actually listened to the answers. When he mentioned Veronica, it was with genuine regret rather than blame for her departure. As we prepared to leave, he hesitated. "I know we can never go back, and I wouldn't want to anyway. We weren't good for each other. But I hope you don't hate me anymore." The revelation startled me. I didn't hate him. The anger that had once fueled me had burned away long ago, leaving behind something closer to indifference tinged with pity. James had lost everything that had once defined him, while I had found everything that truly mattered. "I don't hate you, James. I wish you well in Chicago. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." We parted with an awkward handshake, the physical distance between us an appropriate metaphor for our separate journeys. I watched him walk away, struck by the realization that this was truly the end of a chapter that had defined so much of my adult life. 2 weeks later, I received an invitation that brought my journey full circle. Le Cirque was hosting a charity event featuring guest chefs, and they wanted me to participate. The symmetry was too perfect to decline. I would return to the restaurant I had fled, not as James Campbell's accessory, but as Elizabeth Campbell, celebrated chef and entrepreneur. I developed a special menu for the event, with each dish telling part of my story. Heirloom tomato tarts, representing the early catering days, a sustainable fish preparation showcasing our commitment to environmental responsibility, and a dessert featuring honey from the farm's newly established beehives. On the night of the event, I arrived at Le Cirque with my team, entering through the kitchen rather than the front door. In the quiet moment before service began, I stood in a corner of the bustling kitchen, taking in the controlled chaos around me. 5 years earlier, I had left this restaurant feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. Now I returned, expanded by experience and confident in my place in the world. During the dinner, I recognized several of James's former colleagues among the guests, now eager to associate themselves with my success. One even mentioned a daughter interested in our internship program. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I took no particular pleasure in it. Their approval, like James's disapproval before it, was irrelevant to my worth. The foundation continued to grow, expanding into education and culinary training for women from disadvantaged backgrounds. We established scholarship programs at culinary schools and created apprenticeship opportunities within Campbell's Harvest's various ventures. My personal life expanded as well. After years of focusing exclusively on rebuilding, I began dating David, an architect specializing in sustainable building design whom I met through a mutual friend. Our relationship developed slowly, both of us bringing past experiences that made us cautious but also more appreciative of genuine connection. During our third dinner together, David asked about my success story, having recognized my name but not knowing the details. I read about Campbell's Harvest, but the articles never explain how you built something so significant so quickly, he said. What was the catalyst? I considered the question carefully. I walked away from a relationship that diminished me, I finally answered. That first step leaving was actually the most important part of building anything. That takes extraordinary courage, he observed. Or extraordinary desperation, I countered with a small smile. Sometimes they look the same from the outside. As Campbell's Harvest approached its 5th anniversary, I hosted a special dinner for the women from our foundation, many of whom had successfully launched businesses after leaving controlling relationships. We gathered at the farm, seated at a long table under string lights, with food prepared from ingredients grown just yards away. I raised my glass in a toast to new beginnings and the courage to walk away from what doesn't serve us. The women around the table, some still bearing the visible tension of recent trauma, others relaxed into their newfound freedom, raised their glasses in return. Their faces reflected back the journey I had taken, at different stages of the same path toward reclaiming their power. After dinner, as the guests mingled and watched the sunset over the fields, I found a quiet moment to reflect on the empire I had built. The true value wasn't in the revenue numbers or magazine covers. It wasn't even in proving James wrong about my capabilities. The real empire was the life I had created on my own terms, a life filled with purpose, authentic relationships, and the freedom to define success for myself. The greatest revenge hadn't been financial success or public recognition. It had been the simple, profound act of becoming fully myself. Looking out over the farm as twilight settled, I felt gratitude for the painful dinner that had forced me to confront the truth of my marriage. Without that moment of clarity, I might never have found the courage to walk away, and walking away had been the first step toward everything that mattered. What's your story of walking away and rebuilding? I'd love to hear about your own moments of transformation in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find this story. Subscribe to join our community of resilient spirits, sharing wisdom from life's toughest lessons. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message of hope after heartbreak, share this video with them. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the most difficult seasons. Until next time, this is Elizabeth Campbell, reminding you that the empire you build for yourself will always be stronger than one built by someone else.